The 1970s were a wild time for television. For every hit show that defined the decade, there were dozens of pilots so strange you'll wonder how they ever got made. Picture this: network executives gambling on ideas about angels at help desks, crime-fighting daredevils, and even android cops that malfunctioned every 5 minutes. Can you imagine tuning in and seeing that? Some aired once, others never saw daylight, but all were unforgettable misfires. Let's uncover the most bizarre pilots you never knew existed. Scared Stiff, 1971. Imagine Bob Denver, the lovable Gilligan himself, stepping into the shoes of a detective. That was the pitch for Scared Stiff, a 1971 unsold comedy pilot that aimed to mix mystery with slapstick humor. Denver played Henderson, one of two bumbling private eyes assigned to solve the murder of Mr. Delgado. It should have been quirky fun. Instead, it became a confusing mess that critics couldn't even classify. The tone swung awkwardly between light suspense and clumsy comedy. One moment, the detectives were fumbling through clues, the next they were delivering flat one-liners that landed with a thud. Reviews hammered it for being unfunny, uneven, and painfully slow. Worse, Denver had no real chemistry with his co-star, Warren Berlinger, which is brutal when the whole thing depends on a buddy dynamic. The show's creator, Gary Marshall, would go on to make iconic series like Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy. But Scared Stiff? It never made it past the pilot stage. The sad irony is that the talent was there, but the material was paper thin. Even Denver, who could charm audiences on a desert island with nothing but a coconut, couldn't save this one. In the end, Scared Stiff stands as a lesson in wasted potential. You can have a big name, a promising premise, and a powerhouse producer, but if the execution is off, you're done. Networks shelved it, and most people forgot it ever existed. Well, until now. Class of '55, 1971. Not every bizarre pilot relied on wacky gimmicks. Some were just way too heavy for primetime audiences. Class of '55 was one of those. Written by James L. Brooks, who later created Taxi and The Simpsons, the pilot followed Peter, a man returning to his college campus on the day his divorce was finalized. Played by Alan Alda, Peter reconnects with his ex-wife and confronts old memories in a bittersweet, emotional reunion. Sounds heartfelt, right? But here's the problem. ABC in 1971 was chasing lighthearted sitcoms and upbeat family shows, not melancholy dramas about failed marriages and second chances. Audiences tuning in after dinner wanted easy laughs, not an emotional gut punch. The performances were strong. Louise Lasser co-starred as Christine, Peter's ex-wife, and the chemistry between her and Alda gave the story real depth. Even Jamie Farr showed up, years before MASH made him famous. But the tone was mismatched with what networks thought Americans wanted to watch on a weekly basis. Critics who did see it praised the writing, but ABC knew it would never compete with the crowd-pleasing sitcoms of the day. Instead, the pilot aired once on November 30th, 1971, and then quietly disappeared. Ironically, it was a blessing in disguise. Had Alda been locked into Class of '55, he might never have taken the role of Hawkeye Pierce in MASH. So, while the show itself flopped, it unintentionally cleared the path for one of the greatest TV careers of all time. Class of '55 proves that sometimes failure can be the best career move you'll ever make. Evil Nevil, 1974. Here's one that could only come out of the 1970s. CBS tried to turn Evel Knievel, the real-life daredevil stuntman, into a TV crime fighter. The logic? If he can jump buses on a motorcycle, why not let him take down criminals too? The pilot cast a young Sam Elliott as Knievel years before his mustache and gravelly voice made him famous. The story had Nevil doubling as a stunt performer and a hero stopping sabotage plots. One episode idea involved him facing off against a female daredevil in a Battle of the Sexes stunt showdown. Yes, really. The stunts were genuine spectacle, but the plot was pure cheese. CBS ultimately got cold feet. They worried kids might copy Nevil's stunts and hurt themselves. Add in the gimmicky premise of a stuntman turned superhero, and the network passed before the pilot even aired. Elliot's version of Nevil became nothing more than a trivia footnote. Looking back, it's easy to see why. The danger of imitating real stunts aside, the concept just wasn't sustainable. How many weeks could you really watch Knievel foil bad guys between jumps? It would have stretched thin fast. Still, there's a strange charm in knowing the network even tried. It shows just how far executives were willing to go in chasing cultural fads. Evel Knievel was a legend, but as a TV hero, that was one jump that didn't stick the landing. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour, 1976. When the Brady Bunch ended in 1974, you'd think the Wholesome family would be retired. Nope. By 1976, ABC decided to repackage them as a singing, dancing variety act. Imagine wholesome sitcom parents belting out disco numbers and glittery costumes, mixed with slapstick comedy sketches and synchronized swimming routines. That was the pilot for the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. It was part sitcom, part musical review, and entirely bizarre. The actors reprised their Brady roles, but the show dropped them into surreal, over-the-top set pieces that made zero sense. Florence Henderson and Robert Reed gamely tried to sell the concept, but even they looked uncomfortable in sequined outfits under flashing neon lights. Critics tore it apart for being cringeworthy, derivative, and tone-deaf to the Brady charm. Even worse, the original Jan Brady actress, Eve Plum, refused to return, so another actress was brought in, a move fans instantly noticed. Despite terrible reviews, the pilot was picked up briefly, and a handful of episodes aired, but the novelty wore off quickly. Ratings tanked, and the Variety Hour became infamous as one of the worst spin-offs in TV history. The Brady pilot is remembered today less as a fun experiment, and more as proof that networks sometimes push an idea so far past its expiration date that it becomes comedy gold, for all the wrong reasons. Almost Heaven, 1978. What if angels worked in an office that functioned like a heavenly help desk? That was the high-concept idea behind Almost Heaven, a 1978 pilot starring Ava Gabor, Robert Hayes, and a young Jay Leno. The story followed angels acting as caseworkers in the afterlife, juggling the bureaucracy of heaven while trying to help people on earth. The tone was whimsical, sentimental, and oddly bureaucratic. Imagine the Mary Tyler Moore Show, but with halos. The angels weren't all-knowing guides, they were overworked clerks who missed deadlines and argued over assignments. It was equal parts quirky comedy and heartwarming lesson-of-the-week storytelling. The pilot aired once on ABC as a holiday special in December 1978. The concept had potential for episodic adventures, with angels guiding different people each week, but the execution fell flat. Reviews said it was too sappy to be funny and too silly to be moving. Jay Leno, then still years away from late-night fame, had a small role that showed his comedic timing, but even that couldn't salvage the muddled premise. Audiences were more confused than entertained. In the end, ABC passed. The celestial bureaucracy idea may have sounded clever on paper, but it was too strange to pull off. Almost Heaven remains a reminder that sometimes television's biggest swing is also its biggest miss. The Girl with Something Extra, 1973. Here's one of the weirdest attempts at mixing romance and sci-fi. NBC thought audiences would love Sally Field as a newlywed who could read minds. Yep, mind reading in a marriage sitcom. The idea was to explore the comic chaos that would erupt when one partner literally knew what the other was thinking at all times. The pilot leaned hard into wacky misunderstandings, with Field's character blurting out people's thoughts in the middle of conversations. One moment she was spoiling surprise parties, the next she was calling out bosses for thinking the wrong thing. On paper, that sounds like a goldmine for awkward comedy. In practice, it came off messy, uneven, and more irritating than charming. NBC had high hopes, but audiences didn't warm to the strange mix of domestic comedy and supernatural gimmicks. Instead of watching a couple navigate love, viewers were watching a parade of psychic slip-ups. The tone never decided whether it wanted to be romantic, funny, or sentimental, and the result was a confusing blend of all three. The show did briefly make it past the pilot stage, but it was doomed from the start. Critics slammed it for wasting Field's undeniable talent, calling it a sitcom with no core. By the end of its short run, it became an industry cautionary tale about chasing novelty at the expense of story. It's remembered now not for its charm, but for showing how even a star as magnetic as Sally Field can't save a premise that's already cracked. The Karen Valentine Special, 1974. Networks loved turning rising stars into sitcom leads, and Karen Valentine was supposed to be the next big thing after her Emmy-winning turn on Room 222nd. So ABC gave her a pilot that was part comedy, part musical, and part, well, nobody was quite sure. The special was a bizarre hybrid. Valentine sang, danced, and delivered sketch-style comedy bits, all while trying to play a relatable young woman navigating everyday life. One moment she was rehearsing a musical number, the next she was stuck in an oddball gag about apartment living. It was disjointed, chaotic, and almost unwatchable. Audiences didn't know what they were seeing. Was it a variety show? A sitcom? A star showcase? The pacing flipped so rapidly it felt like channel surfing within a single episode. Critics called it tone deaf and accused ABC of trying too hard to make Valentine into someone she wasn't. What makes it stand out is how quickly it disappeared. ABC aired the pilot once, shrugged, and walked away. Valentine continued acting, but the attempt to turn her into a solo headliner collapsed in spectacular fashion. Today, the Karen Valentine Special is remembered as a relic of the 70s variety craze, a reminder that not every promising star could carry a Frankenstein mix of comedy and spectacle. The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1972. Sherlock Holmes is timeless, right? Not if you try to repackage him as a hip modern detective with futuristic gadgets. That's exactly what CBS attempted in 1972 with their Hound of the Baskervilles pilot. Instead of a classic Victorian mystery, this version tried to inject new life by making Holmes a quirky crime solver with electronic tools and a modern sensibility. Think less foggy London alleyways, more clunky gadgets and awkward one-liners. The result? A baffling mix of old-fashioned story and new wave gimmicks. Fans of Arthur Conan Doyle's legendary detective hated it. Purists dismissed it as a cheap cash grab, while casual viewers found the pacing slow and the tone uneven. Critics mocked it for looking like a rejected spy show that forgot its own identity halfway through. The irony is that Holmes was having a minor resurgence in the 70s, with new paperback editions and TV reruns sparking interest. CBS had the chance to ride that wave with a thoughtful adaptation. Instead, they went for a clumsy update that alienated everyone. The pilot never made it past its initial screening. In hindsight, it's often cited as proof that trying to modernize a classic without respecting its heart is a guaranteed way to lose both old fans and new ones. The Good Time Girls, 1970. The early 70s were filled with sitcom experiments, and The Good Time Girls might be the most awkward of the bunch. The premise? 3 single women sharing an apartment in Chicago while juggling careers, dates, and quirky neighbors. That sounds normal enough. But here's the twist. The show constantly swung between laugh track comedy and serious lessons of the week. One episode setup involved a wacky night out that suddenly veered into heavy territory about independence and responsibility. The tonal whiplash left viewers unsure whether to laugh or sigh. The casting wasn't bad, but the writing leaned too hard on stereotypes. Instead of empowering characters, the women were written as either dizzy, unlucky, or too perfect. That imbalance made the humor fall flat and the drama feel forced. ABC hoped it would be their answer to That Girl or Mary Tyler Moore, but the pilot didn't even come close. Critics called it half sitcom, half lecture, which is pretty much a death sentence for television. The show never advanced, and the pilot was quickly forgotten. Today, it's remembered as an example of networks chasing social change themes without the writing chops to pull it off. 10. The Karen and Richard Carpenter, show 1976. In the mid-70s, the Carpenters were at the peak of their fame, with hit records and sold-out concerts. Naturally, TV execs wanted to cash in by turning Karen and Richard into sitcom stars. The result was The Karen and Richard Carpenter Show, a pilot that mixed family comedy with live music performances. On paper, it was meant to be the best of both worlds, sitcom antics between siblings, followed by polished musical numbers. In reality, it was a tonal train wreck. The Carpenters were incredible musicians, but awkward actors. Their comedic timing was stiff, their dialogue flat, and the transitions from canned jokes to heartfelt ballads were jarring. The musical sequences, while beautifully sung, didn't blend with the sitcom framing. Imagine Karen Carpenter delivering a heartfelt ballad right after a corny laugh track gag. The mood swings were unbearable. Audiences who tuned in expected to see the warmth of the Carpenters' music translated to TV. Instead, they got a strange hybrid that did neither music nor comedy justice. CBS quietly shelved the project after its test run. Looking back, it's clear this was never going to work. The Carpenters were iconic, but they were performers, not sitcom actors. Trying to shoehorn them into a scripted family comedy was a miscalculation that proved not every star can cross over to television. Holmes and Yo-Yo, 1976. By the mid-70s, networks were desperate to fuse cop shows with comedy, and out of that desperation came Holmes and Yo-Yo. The pitch: pair a by-the-book detective with a humanoid robot partner. That's right, a malfunctioning android who short-circuits at the worst possible times. The pilot leaned heavily on slapstick, with Yo-Yo's robot powers often working against him. He'd take photos with his chest camera, only to fog up the film. He'd try to use his strength, only to smash through doors by accident. At one point, his chest literally beeped like a fax machine when nervous. Imagine Columbo meets a glitchy toaster. The problem? It wasn't funny enough to be a comedy, and it wasn't serious enough to be a cop show. The effects were clunky, the robot shtick wore thin fast, and the jokes felt like rejected gags from a children's cartoon. ABC somehow let the pilot spawn a short-lived series, but the premiere was a disaster. Critics called it the death of the cop genre, and audiences tuned out almost immediately. The show barely lasted a season before being unceremoniously canceled. Today, Holmes and Yo-Yo is remembered as one of the strangest ideas ever greenlit, a time capsule of how networks mistook gimmicks for storytelling. The pilot is still infamous for proving that not every experiment belongs in prime time. Chopper, 1974. Think Chips, but with a helicopter. That was the concept behind ABC's Chopper 1. The show centered on two cops patrolling Los Angeles from above, using a police helicopter to chase criminals, rescue victims, and look cool while doing it. Sounds thrilling, right? Wrong. The pilot focused so much on aerial shots that it forgot to tell an engaging story. Scenes dragged on with endless helicopter takeoffs, landings, and wide shots of the city skyline. By the time the characters got around to actually stopping criminals, viewers had already checked out. Casting wasn't bad. Dirk Benedict, who'd later find fame on Battlestar Galactica and the A-Team, starred as one of the pilots. But even his charisma couldn't save the paper-thin scripts and plodding pace. The lack of grounded drama made the show feel more like a tourism reel than a police drama. The pilot did squeak through to series, but only lasted one season. It became a forgotten relic, buried under the much more successful cop shows of the decade. Chopper 1 is a perfect example of networks chasing spectacle, in this case, helicopters, without asking the basic question: is there a story worth telling every week? W.E.B. 1978. Now, here's one that was bizarre, not because of its gimmicks, but because of its tone. W.E.B. was pitched as a behind-the-scenes drama about the television industry itself. It aimed to expose the cutthroat world of network execs, advertisers, and producers clawing their way to the top. Sounds juicy, right? Except it wasn't. The pilot played like a lecture, loaded with boardroom talk and self-important dialogue. Instead of drama, viewers got long-winded monologues about ratings, programming slots, and corporate backstabbing. There were no memorable characters to root for, just a parade of executives scowling and shouting about the future of TV. CBS hoped it would capture the same buzz as movies like Network, but stripped of sharp satire and wit. W.E.B. came off lifeless. Critics hammered it for being pompous and joyless, calling it TV about TV with nothing to say. The show was quickly shelved after a few episodes, with the pilot itself often cited as one of the dullest ever produced. It's bizarre not because it was campy or outrageous, but because someone thought people at home wanted to watch endless boardroom debates about Nielsen ratings. In hindsight, W.E.B proved that even when networks try to dramatize their own industry, they can still completely miss what makes TV entertaining. Monster Squad, 1976. Pilot. Now, here's one for the Saturday Morning Hall of Fame, or infamy. Monster Squad was a live-action kids show that reimagined Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman as crime fighters. Yes, the Universal-style monsters teaming up to solve mysteries and battle cartoonish villains. The pilot leaned hard into camp. A mild-mannered museum night watchman discovered that his wax figures of the monsters came to life. And instead of terrorizing the city, they dedicated themselves to justice. Cue cheesy costumes, awkward fight scenes, and groan-worthy puns. NBC clearly hoped to cash in on the monster craze, but the low-budget effects and goofy writing doomed it from the start. The monsters looked more like awkward Halloween costumes than heroic figures, and the attempts at humor were painfully forced. The show limped through a handful of episodes after the pilot, but critics and audiences didn't bite. It was too silly for older kids, too cheap-looking for younger ones, and way too bizarre for adults. Today, Monster Squad is remembered as one of the oddest attempts to recycle classic movie monsters. Instead of horror, it gave viewers slapstick antics and awkward superheroics. The pilot showed just how far networks were willing to stretch to chase trends, even if it meant turning Dracula into a punchline. The Harlem Globetrotters Pop. Pilot 1970. The Harlem Globetrotters were cultural icons by 1970, dazzling crowds with their basketball tricks and larger-than-life personalities. After their success as an animated series, CBS decided to try a live-action sitcom pilot featuring the real team. The concept? The Globetrotters traveling the country, solving mysteries, pulling pranks, and, of course, showing off their basketball skills. On paper, it sounded fun. In reality, it was a mess. The pilot blended slapstick comedy with Scooby-Doo-style mystery plots, but without the animation magic, it looked awkward. Watching world-class athletes forced into corny sitcom scenes was painful. The timing was off, the jokes fell flat, and the players clearly weren't trained actors. The basketball sequences were impressive, but they didn't mesh with the forced comedy. One scene would have the team dazzling with trick shots. The next would cut to a clunky gag about bumbling villains. Audiences were left scratching their heads. Was this a sports showcase, a comedy, or a mystery show? CBS wisely pulled the plug after the pilot, leaving the Globetrotters to return to what they did best, entertaining fans on the court. Looking back, it's remembered as a bizarre attempt to stretch a beloved brand into a sitcom format that nobody asked for. It was proof that some magic just doesn't translate outside the arena. And there you have it, 15 of the strangest pilots the 1970s ever coughed up. From android cops and monster superheroes to disco-dancing sitcom families and daredevil crime fighters, these were the shows that proved not every idea deserves a full season. Which of these bizarre experiments do you think could actually work if remade today? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into television's strangest what-ifs.